What's up, friends? My name is Josh Varab, and welcome to the Virtual IPA Clinic Week. We're so pumped that you guys are here and hope you're staying safe during these unique times. This is going to be the first of 3 videos walking you through some basic skills and exercises to help you stay relaxed and confident behind the quads. Follow IPA to see the rest of these great videos, as well as some awesome videos from the different battery sections and front ensemble. Grab your sticks, pad, drum, come hang, and let's have a great time. Quad drums look pretty similar, but may look different depending on the brand of drum you have. Most quads start with a drum 1 that is 10 inches, a drum 2 that is 12 inches, a drum 3 that is 13 inches, and a drum 4 that is 14 inches. Nowadays, quads will usually have 1 or 2 of these smaller drums, which are usually called spocks or gocks, and maybe a 6-inch or an 8-inch or both. The drums I'm playing on today are actually 2 6-inch drums, and we tune them a little bit differently to hear some different sounds. Now, it's also important to know how quads are written in music. And now this may look different depending on how your program writes, but for the most part, and as an example, your drum 1 will be on the E space, your drum 2 will be on the C space, your drum 3 will be on the A space, and your drum 4 will be on the F space. Your 1 or 2 gocks may be written on the G or the A above the staff. So each drum has a very specific spot that gives us the best sound quality. These are called our zones. For drums 1 and 2, this zone is an inch in front of the rim that is closest to you. When we hit this zone, we get a nice, full, rich sound. If we play in the center of the head, it's a very dead sound. For drums 3 and 4, we want to think about being an inch away from the rim, and where exactly that is can differ depending on your program and your preferences, but we like to think about being an inch away from these 2 lugs on drum 3 and drum 4. And again, if you hit in the center of the head of these drums, it's a very dead sound. For the spock drums, we want to think either in the center of the head, or another way to think about it is halfway in between the center and the edge. So either one is fine. There's a little less room for error because the drums are smaller, but we want to limit how much moving around we're doing and play consistently on either of those spots. Now, when we're traveling from drum to drum, it is really important to make sure that we are not changing from that primary technique we established on one drum. When we move around to our secondary positions or our X-axis, it is really important to think about only allowing yourself to move from the elbow. So if we are on drums 1 and 2, and we have to play both hands on drum 1, a big tendency is to turn our wrist over and bring our wrist closer together. This is going to change how your wrist turns, and it's really going to impact your rhythms and how well you play. So if you're moving to drum 1, make sure we keep that wrist where it is and only allow ourselves to move from the elbow. This is going to allow for our wrist to move naturally. When we go to over to drum 2, the same thing with our right hand. We don't want to change and turn the wrist over. We want to make sure our wrist stays where it is and only allow ourselves to move from the elbow. Now, when we're going to drums 3 and 4, things change a little bit. So if our right hand goes to drum 3 and now our left hand goes over to drum 3, we want to think about a straight line path, but also our left hand comes down just a little bit, so now we are pointing at the bead. This is an example of what's called a windshield wiper effect. So if we're here on drum 1 and we go to drum 3, that right hand stays in a straight line, that left hand is moving a straight line, but then comes down a little bit. When we move over to drum 4, it's the same thing with that right hand. We don't have to be completely parallel to the bead. We can be pointing the bead, and that's going to allow for our arms to be nice and relaxed and our wrists to move naturally. Now we're going to talk about some technique concepts that are going to help set us up for success for quad drumming. As quad drummers, we hold both sticks with matched grip, meaning that all the fingers are wrapped around the stick and we have about an inch of the stick hanging out of the bottom of the hand. Now, set position is totally up to the preference of the program. Some drum lines and players prefer to place their hands on wherever the exercise begins. If we're doing an exercise on drum 2, we may go to set position and go ahead and go to drum 2. Some people may prefer to move our hand midway through the exercise if we know we're getting ready to play notes on drum 3. Something we're going to talk about that's becoming a little more common is this concept called home base, meaning no matter where the exercise starts or ends, we always come back to drums 1 and 2. So even if the exercise starts on drum 3, we hang out on 1 and 2, and then at the start of the exercise, we play that note on drum 3. but rather than leaving our hand there, we go ahead and bring it back. We want to feel like there's a magnet on drums 1 and 2, and whenever there's space, when we're not playing, either before, during, or after an exercise, we are moving our hands back to drums 1 and 2. For example, off the left hand, we feel this is going to keep things simple and not complicate things when you're playing more challenging rounds. Now, when we're at set position, we've already thought about those zones that we established earlier. It's really important to figure out what's the angle of my wrist and what's going on with my arms. So there's a few different ways you can think about this. If our hands are turned all the way over and our thumb is at a 0 degrees, this is called German grip. If our wrists are turned up and our thumb is at a 90 degrees, this is called French grip, most commonly used on timpani. As quad players, to achieve what we want to think about being right in between, being at what's called American grip, where our thumb is at a 45 and our wrists are only a little bit turned over. So another way to achieve this is thinking about a straight line path being from your elbow all the way down to the beat of the stick. This is going to allow for our wrist to move as naturally as possible. Now, what's also really important, because we have these rims here, that we establish a nice downward angle of the beat of the stick. So if we are having our hands parallel, we're going to likely hit the rim and have inconsistent sounds. But if we think about a downward angle on the stick, it's going to allow us to have more consistent playing zones, consistent articulation. Less likely to hit the rim. Some tips and tricks for this is using 2 fingers to make sure you have a downward angle and making sure your quads aren't too high or too low so you can have a nice downward angle on the stick. So for our arms and our distance from our body, some people have a tendency to either play too far out or to have their arms too far in. So a good way we like to think about this is having a medium-sized Gatorade bottle in between your arms, not a gallon of milk, and also not a small water bottle. We want to make sure that we have enough space where we're able to move around and stay relaxed without having any extra tension or without being lazy and having our arms be in the way of each other. So, best way to work on this is to use a mirror. Set up your drums or set up your pad in front of a mirror and go through your checklist of your technique. Start feeling what it's like to play like this or play like this and how it feels to play with that American grip. You'll really start to understand your playing and where your tendencies come from if you pay attention to your technique. So for the exercises we're getting ready to play, we're going to use what's called legato strokes. So as we establish that technique and that American grip, what we want to think about is making sure we have a nice rebound stroke so we can get the best sound quality out of the quads. So best analogy to think about legato strokes is dribbling the basketball. This is something that we are all comfortable and familiar with, and this is going to get us the most relaxed and full sound. If we are too tense while we're dribbling the basketball, that's going to come across in our playing. If we're too light and we're not putting forth any energy, that's going to come across in our playing as well. We want to pretend like we're dribbling that basketball with enough energy to throw the basketball to the ground and for it to come back up to our hand each time. And that is how we're going to simulate our eights. That is going to give us a nice full sound while also staying very relaxed. So, as we move into these exercises, there's a really important concept that we like to talk about here, and it is our primary versus our secondary motions. This is also referred to as our X or Y axis. As quad drummers, we want to spend at least 80% of our time working on one drum or one surface. That's why you don't always need a set of quads or a quad pad to get better at quad drumming, because all, if not most of what we do has to start with those rhythms. Because quad rounds are obviously the best part of playing quads, but if they're not rhythmically strong, they're not going to come off as great as they could. So it's really important that we are establishing that primary motion on one drum and working on these exercises on one drum first. And then as we move to the different rounds and the different zones, we are only allowing ourselves to move from the elbow. Now let's apply this technique to some common quad exercises. The first exercise is called eights and will incorporate 4 different around variations. The last around has a crossover, which is a technique we will cover in the next video. This exercise helps us work our primary motion on one drum and practices keeping our technique consistent as we move around the different variations. Practice this slow and in front of a mirror, making sure that we are moving well and playing in the correct zones. Also try this exercise with different heights, tempos, and multiple measures in the same hand. Let's get started. Our next exercise is one of my favorites called motion. This exercise uses alternating 60 notes to travel around the drum in different variations. Now that both hands are moving and the music becomes more challenging, it's important to keep your technique solid and don't fall to old tendencies. Remember, practice this slow in front of a mirror, making sure we are moving well and playing in the correct zones. If you hear a dead or thin sound, that is a sign that you did not hit your playing zones. Try to pause, isolate that moment, and see what might have gone wrong. A great way to practice this exercise is starting with a measure of 16 notes to remember legato strokes, and also playing this exercise in 4/4 time so that we can practice our mark time and use it in marching exercises. Here we go. Well, all right, guys, that concludes our first video about quad drumming during this IPA Virtual Clinic week. We're so glad you guys showed up, and we hope you gained some rich information to help reach your quad drumming goals. The next two videos are going to be hosted by some of my great friends, and are going to focus on some more intermediate and advanced exercises and quad concepts. So remember, follow IPA to see the rest of these videos, and check out the videos from other battery sections and the front ensemble. We hope you're staying safe, hope you're having a great time. Keep on drumming.